encourage you to welcome Mr. H.P. Slater.
Hey, good afternoon, St. Louis. You know, I'd actually been here several times, and my best memory is there's a barbecue place up, going out west out of town, and it's phenomenal. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to get to go to it, but I remember it. Matter of fact, I tell people the way I remember things is some of the meals we've had. Well, let's get this thing started. So don't trip over your spare parts, as you go to digital transformation. And what I'm going to do is kind of talk a bit about, digital transformation. I mean, to give everybody a real good feel for that. And then what happens when you want to do the digital transformation and manage your parts and kind of tie it all together and answer any questions that you may have. So here's a kind of a quick shot of who I am. I got 12 grandchildren, if you can notice there, and there's 5 of them are redheads. So that's where the red comes from. Well, let me tell you something. When I was a young guy, I learned the 3 rules of pipe fitters. Now, some of you might have experienced expletive speech along the way. It's 4 nouns, a couple verbs, and then a bunch of other stuff that goes to pad it out. Well, the 3 rules of pipe fitters is a little bit like expletive speech, so I don't talk that way, but I have to give you this. So first of all, the boss is everybody, SOB, right? Number 2, Schnitt runs downhill. Hey, this is supposed to be funny, okay, guys? Come on, work with me. And lastly, paydays on Friday. So there's the 3 rules of pipe fitting. Anybody identify with that? It might not just be pipe fitters. Right? Yeah, okay. And I gave you a Dutch bonus. I'm a Dutchman. My mother would say only half, but yes. And basically it goes as I've cut this pipe 3 times and it's still what? Too short. None of you have ever done that, but I have. Well, anyway, if you don't hear anything else I have to say today, remember these things. Number 1, your maintenance profile, absolutely, I'm putting that in there, has a direct impact on your performance. And that performance is financial. You remember the Peanuts cartoons about when the kids are listening to mom and dad? Anybody remember this? And mom and dad to the kids, what does it sound like? Come on, what does it sound like to wham, 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 wham? Come on, work with me. Come on, what? This is the afternoon session. You got to wake you up. So wham, wham, wham. So when you talk about reliability, mean time between failures, every other metric that Doc Palmer would probably tell you should use, or yes, you too. You know what? That's all they say is they don't hear anything. They just hear blah, 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 blah. What you really got to do is you got to talk, where's the money? That's it. And the better you know, the more knowledge you have, the more stuff you can pump into the equation, you can actually minimize failures. And MRO management, planning, scheduling, guess what? They are all integrated processes. So if you want to do planning and scheduling or planning, and you don't really want to do scheduling, that doesn't work. And if you want to do scheduling without planning, it really doesn't still work. And if you want to do that without any inventory or spare parts knowledge, guess what? Ain't working. So they're all integrated. And the last one is, applying the knowledge of your processes and integrating that with your asset management practices, this is a long sentence, will improve your financial performance. And that's where I want to end up, is on that financial performance. So we start out with, anybody take calculus, right? I took calculus. I'm not sure what I'm ever going to use it for, but I learned one thing about limits. So I want to go to the maximum amount and the minimum amount. And I know that the reality is somewhere in between. Well, in this case, this kind of calculus approach to talking about maintenance is because the minimum approach is reactive maintenance. And reactive maintenance is really a painful experience. Now, none of you are at that point, I'm for sure. Nobody's going to own up to, okay, good. So, but what is it characterized by? Catastrophic failures. I mean, you got emergencies. Matter of fact, Ron Moore, in his book, he talks about, if you're in a reactive mode, your safety program is going to be very very ineffective because you're just having a lot of rush. And when the safety problems happen is when you're rushing. And if you kind of look at the spare parts component, squirrel or secret storerooms. And what that is basically when you want to buy some spare parts, we order the 2 we need for the job. I order 2 more to put it where? In my desk, in my closet, in my cubby. I mean, that's reactive maintenance, is it not? And, it just was an increased reliance on your assets because you want to push them harder and harder because we're trying to catch up with what we really should have been. Well, they get results of all those characteristics, means that you only have time for immediate remediation. Yep. You only have time to rush. You got increased staffing. It takes a lot more people to manage crisis reactive maintenance than it does when you're being fully proactive. And the last piece is stocking of materials in the storeroom. If you're in reactive maintenance, there's not a part that the maintenance guys don't like. They want every part that you could think of. So when you go and you open up the vendor catalog about what spare parts you should have, often they have a list about everything soup to nuts. Now they do that basically because they don't want you calling them back to say, why didn't you ask me to stock this stuff? And the more stuff they sell, the more money they make. So that's kind of that double whammy approach when you look at buying parts for your equipment when you ask the vendor, because that's where they're at. Well, if you look at it, kind of using the PDF curve, and I'm only going to talk about reactive maintenance, and then I'm going to talk about the digital. I'm going to skip the ones in between. You're going to see that. But in reactive maintenance, things are running. Don't do anything. Things are running. Don't do anything. Matter of fact, something happens. Guess what? There's a change in vibration. There's a change in oil analysis. There's changes. But guess what? You could do something about it, but you could do nothing. And lo and behold, mechanical defects occur. And guess what? You got all sorts of information happening in this equation. But guess what? Okay, all together, you do nothing. And lastly, bam, ugly stuff starts happening. Emergency maintenance, catastrophic failure. Now, you probably could have just fixed the asset, but now we've taken and ran it right to catastrophic failure. So now that's why a lot of our clients stock complete pumps, or at least the power end of a pump. So when it fails catastrophically, they just take one out and put a new one in and get running again. How expensive is that to have a full storeroom full of full power ends, right? Well, what's the impact on the maintenance process? Well, here it is. We don't know our asset condition. We don't know our bill of materials. If you're in reactive maintenance, they don't know this stuff because they don't have time to do bill of materials. And they don't know the root causes because root cause nothing. I got to what? Fix it. Get her done. Unknown labor. I mean, it's reactive work. So they got maybe 20% plannable work. 80, 90% of it's reactive work. I mean, it's a real painful situation. All they do is manage it. All they do is do the work. There's some feedback, but guess what? There's no feedback. Why? Because the guys are being strung out on the next job, right? Nothing new. So everybody's got that. Reactive maintenance, we don't want to be there. Well, your maintenance profile does have a big impact on that financial return. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the IoT. So now we've talked a bit about maintenance. I'm going to kind of shift over to the digital part. And what you really got to start talking about digital, you need to talk about the IoT, or the Internet of Things, because we have a lot of those things around our houses and all. I mean, I got a Nest camera. I got the Ring doorbell. My wife loves gadgets. She just loves them. So I'm kind of waiting on what the next one's going to be. Anybody got that happen at your home? You got Nest, you got the Ring, you got the, who knows? Yeah, I got them all. But you get data. That's what's kind of cool is I can sit here in this room, I can bring up my Nest app, and I can tell you whether it's rain at home in the backyard. Is it raining? Is it not raining? Has somebody been up on my deck looking in the house or not? I can take a look through the house. I can look in my basement. I can look around I got 4 cameras, so I can have a real heyday there. But this data, that's the point. So that Internet of Things is that information, and how do you use it? I mean, back to the reactive maintenance, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing. There's a lot of data out there, but what you're doing nothing. Well, how can that help move you to be more digitally transformed? That's the real question here. So up on the board, I kind of threw a cooling tower system. Now, okay, someone's going to say, that doesn't apply to me. That's not me, is it? But I know all of you have pumps. I know all of you have heat exchangers. I know that all of you have water circulation systems. So maybe you don't have this, but you got a lot of those components. You got a yes on that? It's out there. So this digital thing is kind of like on your pumps. You know, if you got any digital processing, they're gathering pressure and temperature. They're gathering flow. There's vibration information you can harvest. There's oil analysis, active oil analysis. You can harvest that data. But guess what? Back in the reactive world, what do you do with all that data? You do nothing. So it's all out there. If you take a look at your control loops, I've said this several times back in my Emerson days, that was just a little bit ago, about control loops. You know, probably if you want to improve the efficiency of your manufacturing process, I bet that most people overlook the effect that your control loops have. They overlook it because a lot of the control systems, and I'm not a controls engineer. I got a friend over here that can help me a lot with that, but there's a lot of data that you could harvest if you had the right control system in an active manner, and you'd find out whether you're overshooting your temperature points or undershooting. You could control that heat exchanger and other processes better. Heat exchangers. I mean, a lot of people do the total PM thing. It's been 6 months. We're going to rod and clean our heat exchangers. It's been 6 months. Now, shoot, you might not have only ran it for 1 week, but it's 6 months, so we got to clean it. Well, you're probably way over cleaning or over maintaining it, or you may have ran it a bad batch of water or whatever your medium through it is, and next thing you know, you're only getting half the cooling that you really should have gotten. But guess what? Back in reactive maintenance, you're doing what? Doing nothing. So there's data. You could be gathering that data. You could be gathering the data on those cooling pumps. Same thing as the other ones. And that cooling tower, think about that. You got pressure, you got flow, temperature. Also, you can gather information on chemistry, your pH, the other chemicals in the process. You could know more information and hence control your processes better. And a lot of us, I come from a chemical background, pharmaceutical yields. Chemical yields are huge. I mean, 1 or 2% chemical or pharmaceutical yields are big money, big money. And so you think about that chemistry and that cooling tower and the effectiveness of that, along with the pumps and all. And this is not just on cooling tower, but say you had on a vessel, tank vessel, you're doing a vaporization I mean, you could get better yields if you just did it better. So what's that digital operational profile look like? We talked about the max, which is that reactive one. We're going to go all the way over to the digital one. Well, you know, we know our performance. We don't have catastrophic failures because we're looking at our data before we ever get to that point. I mean, we got our bill of materials done. I mean, we're getting materials strategically sourced. We're taking a look at no emergency work. So it really helps our safety program, doesn't it? And our assets produce at the proper operational limits. That's the bottom line on this one, is that operational limits. You're operating very well because you got data, you got knowledge, you're using it, you're being participative in that process. Because the results of all that is, you know, you got time to take care of issues. You got maintenance that's scheduled in advance. You basically got stocking of materials when you need them. And this thing about having squirrel storerooms really is not necessary. because people have faith in the system. Why do people do squirrel store? They don't trust the system. You know, that storeroom people, they said they were going to stock it for me. They said they would have it for me. And guess what? When I went there to get it, it was either not there, they couldn't find it, or the condition of the part was deteriorated. And I'll go off on my own little tangent of, my guys, when you store the stuff in your storeroom, I don't care what it is, store it so it maintains the full integrity of the product. That's the product and the packaging. If you got carbon steel shafts for different things and you're storing them in a humid environment and they're all rusty, guess what? You're really storing a reliability problem, because they got to be cleaned up before you can ever use them. And heaven forbid if the guy with the craftsman goes out there with emery cloth and just hand cleans them. How do you know that it's perfectly round in the future if he's out there rubbing it with emery cloth to get the rust off? You don't. That's not precision maintenance. So what does it look like? You kind of go back to that reactive profile, go to the proactive here. You got most of your work is all plannable. So you got time to plan. We got time to kit materials. We got time to schedule the work. We can do our equipment data. We can get our permits. Basically, it enables that planning, the scheduling process to happen. With that, we're going to still have some underlying things happen. I mean, Murphy's Law is never going to go away. So it's admit it and go on with life. But that is the small piece of the work in coordination, not the majority of the work in coordination. You see the difference here. It's time to do the right stuff. But the most important thing is that feedback loop. It actually does not have it doesn't happen because you got time for feedback. You got time to look at the data and say, you know what, we've had this problem before, and this is the reason why we have it. Why don't we take care of it in the future? And that gives you root cause failure analysis. That was the last piece there at the top. And it all feeds back into the equation. All makes sense. I mean, what you're doing is using the digital information to give you data. That data transfers into time. And how does that look as you look across the processing? So the IoT thing is that you're doing continuous monitoring. You're looking at the asset, you're looking at the data, you're looking at the system. We're not just looking at an asset, we're looking at the whole system, how it's all functioning. And that gives you machine learning. So back to that artificial intelligence piece, you get more information, you can kind of start predicting how things are going to go in the future. That's becoming totally digitally transformed. With that, the system is monitored. The system's monitored. The system's, oh, look at that. We got a problem. Something happened. Now, I usually like to blame the operators because it can't be the maintenance guys. Can't be. It's got to be the operators. But something happened. But the real thing is that we know about it. So we can do our root cause. We can do our kitting. We can do our planning. We can do our scheduling. And then get the work done. And you notice that we took out that drop in the curve. Because basically we resumed production, and emergency maintenance does what? Work with me. Emergency maintenance goes away. So how do you integrate all this? I mean, that's the next piece. So we got our digital data. We've seen how digital data works better than the reactive mode. We've seen how it can help us have knowledge. Well, what does this do for, MRO? What does it do for planning and scheduling? How do we stop tripping over spare parts because we got to have one of everything, and we got squirrel storerooms, we got all these other things out there. So I'll kind of go through these topics about MRO, planning, scheduling, and all. So I like to cook MRO down to 7 rights. I like, 7 days in a week, right? So 7 rights. So the first one is have the right catalog records. And that's not just having a good description. Matter of fact, I could live with a bad description. Don't listen to me about this now, Dick. Nope. I would rather have an okay description, but have a filled manufacturer and part number. I gotta have a manufacturer and part number, because with that, I can literally go and start sourcing that part, and I can build bill of materials. I would prefer to have a really great description, but if I only have time for one or the other, I gotta have those two, gotta have them. Matter of fact, replenishment, setting proper replenishment criteria. So often we have these requests for materials, add this to the storeroom, add this to the storeroom. And most clients, what they'll do is they'll ask that person, well, how many of these should you stock? Anybody have that? How many of these should you stock? Well, does the requester really know how many you should stock? Are they a professional person in setting replenishment criteria? They're not a professional at that. But we in the MRO viewpoint should ask the right questions. So what do you think the mean time between failure is? How quickly can you get the part? How many assets use the part? You know, all those pertinent questions. And then I can set the replenishment criteria at basically have the right number and not too much, not too little. And receiving the items. So when you receive items in the storeroom, what the number one thing is it the right item? So how do you know it's the right item? Manufacturer and part number. I didn't say description. And I want to know they got the right quantity, and I want the right quality. I don't want junk on my shelves. If you got junk on your shelves, if your reorder point is at 2 and you got 2 on the shelf, but they're both pieces of junk, what is that? What happens in the MRO world? Well, the MRO world says I have 2 on the shelf. I don't need to order anymore. From the maintenance viewpoint is I got 2 pieces of junk on the shelf that you're never going to use. So how many do I really have? 0. Or if you do install them, you're installing a failure. And then you just have a failure and you're going to install a failure to have another failure. This is like, what's that? Murphy's Law. Help me. The definition of insanity, wasn't it? Yes. Have the right storage, maintain the items. That's like rotate the pumps, pump motors, all those, rotate them, change the oil and assets that need oil changes, hang the belts right, do all those things, maintain the item quality. Inventory locations, have that all right, on demand. So things can be on demand, which doesn't mean I don't stock it. When you need it, I'll buy it. Consignment, have somebody else own it. Why should I own them? Matter of fact, Fastenal will do that for nuts and bolts. And matter of fact, a lot of motion industries, I think they'll even do a lot of stuff, consignment. And guess I don't have to carry it on my books. They're carrying it. Matter of fact, if it goes bad, the quality goes bad, who owns it? They do, not me. And replenishment. And the right management practices, cycle counting. Cycle counting is not counting your inventory storeroom over 12 months one time. That's a rolling physical inventory when you divide the storeroom into 12 parts and count 1 every month. That's not cycle counting. That's just a rolling annual physical. Cycle counting is a very active and proactive process. Metrics, having the right metrics. And the one I listed here was one that I kind of pulled from PCA, which is this operational inventory accuracy. Basically, we're going to go in and we're going to assess that storeroom to make sure that the data that they're giving us for cycle counting is accurate. And we're going to have shelf life management all the way through the process. And audits. People don't do what you expect. They do what you inspect. And that's a very much a military thing. And we don't have to do 100% inspection. You can just take a look at a few things and you can find out about what you really need to do. Matter of fact, Bruce, you shared one about that this morning, about inspecting a whole planned work order. You didn't have to do all of them, but you could pick which one you wanted to do. And just the fact that people know that you're going to audit will automatically what? Improve results. Planning is a future activity. And that's one of the things that I was trying to impress upon my past employer. They thought that planning should be like this week's stuff. No, it's future. So confirming things, make sure that what you actually need to do, what you want to do, get the parts all planned, get their job tasks all put together. All those things that you want to do, including the permits, make sure that the actual production group is in the process to make sure that when you do schedule it, you can get the job done. And scheduling, that moves that plan from a point of planning only to a reality. And with that, you coordinate with production planning. That was one of my big aha moments years ago, was that we would talk to the operations group for when we could do a job. And then next thing we know, they would change the schedule. And, but who was changing the schedule was always the question I had. Who changed it? It was production planning. So production planning didn't have any regard for what we needed, for what we needed to do. They just did stuff on their own. Anybody have that happen? You got things set up with operations, but all of a sudden it changes all the time? Well, production planning might be the culprit. So dial them in and get your MRO materials sourced and ready, maintenance, contractors, whatever you need, coordinate that and do that work on the priority, the asset availability, keep things moving along efficiently. And we also talk about having a prior week schedule. And one of the things I'll ask people when we go out to do even an MRO assessment, do you have a schedule? Well, yeah, we got a schedule. Well, when do you do the schedule? We do it every morning. Well, that's not really very good scheduling. I wouldn't even call that scheduling. That's just managing crisis. And basically you lock in the work and you measure it. You measure whether you get the work done on time and on schedule. And when you report those results, it can be an auditing activity and improve the situation. And the last piece, about planning and scheduling is the first one, which is, time to repair. If you don't have any impact upon time, that time to repair an asset is not an issue, then why would you even have a storeroom? If you can wait to get the parts, then you don't need a storeroom. But that's not the case. Most of us can't wait. So that's why we have a storeroom. So that mean time to repair can be optimized when you get the planning and the scheduling all linked together. The master parts catalog helps you do the job right. You got the bill of materials put together and all the way down to that replenishment criteria. So all three of these work together in harmony to deliver the best results. Because you get the sourcing done right, you get the planning done right, you get the accuracy improved, that's that feedback loop. Planned jobs are much more efficient, and you get more planned jobs done, you get more resources used, more proactive. But the bottom line is improve customer service, increase sales, increase profits. See, we're turning this up. We're making sure that we talk in terms of money. So management doesn't care about that. Planned jobs does all these good things. They just really want to see happy customers. They want to see more stuff being sold, and they want to see their profitability go back up. Because here's the deal. If you apply all this information, the asset state, and that's all from the digitally transformed world that we could move to, and we take care of the asset processes that we got the bill of materials, everything can kind of flow together so that things are teamed together properly, production planning all the way through the maintenance process. But most importantly is culture. I mean, one of the things that we often talk about is change management is probably more important than even what we're going to change, is how do we manage how people think about it? Because number one, planning is future work. Scheduling compliance is important to everybody, not just to maintenance. Matter of fact, failures are not acceptable. And if you really think about it, a lot of people think that failures are inevitable. And failures are going to happen, so we're just going to have to live with it. But really, the real proof of the pudding is accepting the fact that failures are not acceptable. I mean, if you're NASA, and remember we were sending people to the moon, Apollo 13, Failures were not going to be, if anybody's watched the movie, failures are not acceptable. They had a problem, but they were going to get their guys back, and they worked on it. They worked the problem. Maintaining effective OEE, now that's an overall equipment effectiveness, is a great metric, because if you apply it correctly, you get data that can help you totally increase your process. And I really encourage you to get it when you first start, because that gives you your starting point so you can show your improvements. So as you apply all this together from the reactive world, we got the reactive world, we got the proactive world. I kind of put this graphic together because lost revenue. If you're in the reactive mode at time point number 1, now I didn't put years or days or weeks on it, but as you work the process, they started out with a lot of lost revenue. And as they improved their processes, they actually started to the point where they were not losing revenue. Well, the thing is their asset management state went way up also, because they were applying the knowledge that they gained from their systems, from their data. They were knowing what was going on. They weren't waiting for it to fail and then say, oh, we got to deal with it. Profitability. This is the money slide. Profitability will go up. I mean, if they got lost revenue and their asset management state is low, their profitability is not going to be good. Now, these are not exact numbers. These are for example only. So don't go home and say, these are the exact things that are going to happen, because I don't know your situation. But this is the graphical representation of it. And as you've noticed, 100% at period 10 is actually more than 100%. Why is it more than 100%? Because the yields that you thought you could have gotten were actually, you now have enough information where you can actually exceed what you thought you were going to receive. That's why it's more than 100%. I know someone might ask me that question later. How's it could be 100% plus? So again, if you don't hear anything else I have to say today, remember, your maintenance profile, what? Has a direct impact on your financial performance. I've shown you that. Number 2, the more you know, the better you'll be to take care of your problems in the future. MRO management, planning, scheduling, all that is an integrated process. They all work together. It's a harmony. And applying the knowledge of your processes and integrating your asset management, put that all together, you will improve your financial performance. That's where the money is, right there. And of course, you're not going to be tripping over your spare parts, because you're now proactively managing the whole equation. Sound good? Any questions? I'll try to answer them. Doc, I think we got to have a microphone.
What do you think about using turns as a measure?
Of inventory?
You're right.
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I like that question, because I think it's a terrible metric. And the reason I say that is in the storeroom. Okay, if you're in a grocery store, I got time for questions like that. Good. If I'm in a grocery store and I'm in the bread aisle, bread has to turn how fast? Really quick. And the canned goods got to turn somewhat quick, and the meat aisle turns, things got to turn relatively quick. That's one extreme, the grocery store. However, you go to an MRO storeroom. In the MRO storeroom, you got consignment items or consumables, and they better turn, right? Earplugs, safety glasses, nuts and bolts, probably pipe fittings, some things like that. And then the next thing you got are like what I call regular items. You may have bearings that are used in multiple pieces of equipment. And those bearings should turn a bit, just because you use them often. I mean, A lot of pumps use the same bearing. A lot of the turbines use the same bearing. So they should turn because you got a lot of applications. But then you got things called insurance items. I call them insurance items because they're like a life insurance policy. Good to have, don't want to use it. Anybody got those things? You got them because they're long lead, painful not to have. I mean, I don't want to tell the boss that the pump failed and I don't have whatever it needs. Those things should not turn. Matter of fact, if they do turn, you probably got a reliability problem. So again, back to your question about inventory turns. So if I know that the inventory turns are 2 across those 3 different groups, what do you know? You really don't know anything. Now, what I do teach in my seminar, I do teach that you should do inventory turns by the type of item. So inventory turns by, consumables should be, 4 to 6 times a year. If it's a regular item, I want to see it turn 2 to 4. Insurance items, I want to see them at 0 or 1 maybe. Because if I start seeing my insurance items turning, either number 1, I got a reliability problem, or they're really a regular item and I mislabeled it. And if I got regular items that don't have a reasonable turn rate, I should ask the question, are they insurance items? And if they're not an insurance item, maybe I shouldn't even be stocking them. See, I'm thinking about being lean and mean in my inventory. Because basically, I don't want to, back to asking about what part should I stock in my storeroom. One of my questions is, what asset uses that part? And if it's the bathroom exhaust fan, who cares if it fails, unless it's the president's, and then, hey, he wants it. But if it's mine, they won't give a, you know what I mean? So if it fails, big deal. It has no production impact. It's just an inconvenience. But if I'm in a paper mill and I got a critical roll machine and it loses one of the main bearings in that system, it's down. And those bearings are sourced from Germany, and they're a 6-week lead time. Okay, that's an important bearing. I better carry that in inventory. So that's part of my questions when people want me to stock parts is, what asset is it for? Because if it's not a critical or what I like to call a very important asset, I don't want to stock it. That was a bonus answer in there, Doc. So is that was that answer your question? So I don't like the metric because it's too broad.
Red,
Yes.
first, thanks for taking the time to present. Good presentation.
Well,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
My question is about the maintenance profile and your thoughts around using things like predictive maintenance, condition-based monitoring, and machine learning to impact how we leverage things like replenishment rates. You mentioned in 2 rights, right number 2 and right number 6, you mentioned the idea about replenishment. Right?
Absolutely.
So how do we use that maintenance profile to really impact and leverage that?
We'll go back to Doc's question in part. So consumable items have a, when you set the replenishment criteria, you do it on equations, lead time, minimum quantities, et cetera. That's a set of the equations. I like to do insurance parts, which maybe that would be more of an insurance part. And basically what you're going to do that is on basically demand frequency. So basically I asked the question, how much insurance do you want on that part? Do you want to have absolutely, you'll never ever not have it? Are you willing to take a little risk, or you're willing to take a lot of risk? And then I set that reorder criteria from that data. But it's not an equation set, it's just ask 3 simple questions. How important is the asset? How often how much security do you want and have in it? And from there, I set the equations. So that answer your question well. There's 2 different models. And so but if it's the one that reoccurs, that's equations. If not, you just use the demand model. But I got to know from the user, I'm not asking the user how many, I'm asking how important is it? And how much risk do we want to come through to? Bruce has seen these equations.
Great presentation, Red. Great. Question is about reorder points, min-max levels, especially like in days like now with COVID, and we're seeing longer lead times. What's your recommendation to organizations to review periodically those min-max levels or those reorder points when we're seeing lead times fluctuate and really make a difference?
Well, the big factor is how much does the item cost? Number one, the item cost and how many you carry in inventory. Basically, how many in inventory times the value. So you got that projected cost. So I like to do it on the total cost of the item only and on the projected cost. I'm going to do the top 90% with an active review, because that top 90% is the 90% of the money and the rest of it has little impact on the bottom line. So if I got $1,000 part, I would probably spend more time on that than the $10 part. Unless you got like $10,000 invested in the $10 part. You see, I kind of work it both ways. I want to know the cost of the item and that projected cost, but I'm only want to do that top 80, 90% because that's where the value is. I mean, if you evaluate your whole inventory, you're going to be doing a ton of work with almost no results. And then if you know about, like in the COVID situation, lead times are starting to pull out, then you better be looking at your insurance items and making sure their criteria is adjusted for it. Because those are the ones that are going to be terribly painful. And then those support items, that's next level, start looking at them. But you're really looking at what asset it's used on, which brings you back to the bill of material. Because one of the questions we were asked just the other day was about, well, we were in a meeting, Dick, we were on that meeting with, you were on, Bruce. They asked about, should the storeroom manage the bill of materials? Well, I got an opinion, I'll share it with you, is the storeroom only knows the parts. Who maintains the machine? Maintenance, the reliability engineer, the maintenance engineer. So who has control over what parts we use and what asset? Who has ultimate control? Maintenance. So who should own the bill of materials? Maintenance. The storeroom basically is basically meeting the demand that they asked for. So when you look at the bill of material, if I maintain it in the storeroom, I might not know that the mechanical seal that you're using today had a failure because they had the wrong O-ring. It started leaking because they had a Buna O-ring when they should have put a Viton in. So the maintenance guys do the root cause, find out, guess what? We should have a Viton O-ring because the Buna is the wrong O-ring. They swap it out, but guess what? They don't own the bill of material. See how this works? I, in the storeroom, do I know that they put a Viton O-ring in place of the Buna? This is where y'all go, no, I have no clue. So who owns the bill of material? The maintenance people. So if they don't have a bill of material that tells me where I used the parts, how do I know a part's obsolete? How do I know? Just because you haven't used it and it has the dust factor on it, just say it has the dust factor. Does that mean that we shouldn't carry it anymore? Anybody have that happen to it? We got a dust factor going on, so we're going to get rid of all that stuff with dust on it. Come on, show of hands. Somebody, yeah, there's that. Thank you. Well, but then again, that part is an insurance item that is a long lead time item, and you just got rid of it. And guess what's going to happen with Murphy? Murphy walks in the door and does what? You need that part. It's going to happen every time. And what does that do to the maintenance people about their faith in the storeroom management? It goes down. And guess what happens to squirrel storerooms? You don't do it. You got your mask. I can't tell, but you don't have a squirrel storeroom. No. Yeah. Hey, I used to have one too, okay? Because I didn't trust the storeroom. But as soon as I took it over and made it trustworthy, I expected people to get rid of their squirrel storerooms. Because we were running 96% plus inventory record accuracy in my storeroom. So if I had it, I had it. And I knew exactly where it was, and it was good stuff. I did not stock any junk. If it was questionable whether you would use it, I didn't keep it. That's ridiculous. Come on, another question. I'm having fun. Anything
Okay,
else?
I have two in the chat. So first question, should MRO storeroom be part of the main inventory supply warehouse or be its own separate entity, and why?
Well, the thing is that in normal manufacturing, that's part of the production process. They're really looking at turns. They're looking at really flowing product and through. They're probably looking at doing all that. But the MRO storeroom has a different set of expectations. Their stuff doesn't necessarily turn a lot. Their stuff is supposed to be taken care of carefully. They got to know, and they only stock a few things. In an MRO storeroom, like one that I managed, I mean, I had 60,000 SKUs and $3 million worth of inventory. I mean, I had a lot of stuff, but I had a lot of single items, single or two items. I didn't have 20 or 40. That's what happens when you have, the large production warehouse, is the expectations are totally different. And so when you're receiving stuff, you're going to be receiving a lot of single items versus a lot of any one item. And the management practices are not the same. And I doubt they'd want a cycle count like we want them to cycle count. I highly doubt it, just to be honest. And cycle counting is if you want to know what's the most important metric in a storeroom, the cycle counting. You get that right, you got everything else pretty right. What's another one?
Second question was, what are the things you consider when deciding on stocking critical spares?
Number one, what asset uses it? Number two, how often do you expect it to fail? I like to put in there too is how easy is it for the maintenance guys to install it correctly? If it's something that he could install improperly very easily, that has an impact on how many I should stock. Because if I got a chance that he's going to put the first one in and ruin it, I better have a backup. So that goes in there too. But those are like my top two or three right there. But number one is what asset? It better be an important one. No, that's criticality, and I'm talking.
I said you can use your FMEA to measure for a measuring stick on
Well, FMEA
your
is really
critical
frequency.
parts that fail.
Yeah, that's your frequency piece. But the other part is your criticality measurement, which is basically back to a whole set of things about it. How important is it production? How important is it to the full plant? How safety, environmental, all those, that's the criticality of the asset. So that figures in there, but that's not the same thing as FMEAs. That's how often. But then I will say this too. When you talk about how often an asset could fail, I would like to come back to the requester and say, what are you doing to know about the failure before it occurs? So they want me to buy something that's $10,000 and put it in the storeroom, just say a big number. My good question from being a good manager would be, what are you doing so that you know about the failure before it occurs? Because if they can tell me that they got a failure occurring with enough lead time, I could order the part when they need it and not stock it in my storeroom. Or the other side, back to the question about criteria, I may stock one just because of Murphy, but I won't. But the second one is basically going to be stocked based on them letting me know from their condition monitoring process. My goal is to have not too little and not too much. Keep the inventory value down. but keep it at the right size so that we meet the challenges of operation. And you could probably throw in there is about the, Bruce, you touched on it, about operations. Are they operating the assets correctly? There was a company called Durametallic. Years ago, I went to a mechanical seal school. They were going to bring in what they call it was a relationship where we would give them X amount of dollars per year, and they would give us all the mechanical seals we needed. And that was based on historical uses. And every year, it was supposed to go down by 5% over the course of 5 to 6 years. And they put a guy on site, and basically it was a win-win relationship. Our goal was to not use mechanical seals, so we didn't have to buy a lot of them. Their goal was to sell us fewer of them because they would make more money on that base loaded cost. So it was a win-win relationship, which is just the opposite of normal, where the more failures we have, the more seals we'd buy. And so one of the questions I would ask back to operations, how are you running that pump? How easy is it for you to destroy the mechanical seal or the bearings? What processes do you have in place so that you don't do that? If running the pump dry can destroy the pump, in the MCC, we can put an alarm in the MCC is that when the horsepower drops, if the pump's not doing any work, the horsepower goes down. It doesn't go up, it goes down. Hence, when the horsepower drops to a certain level, we're running the pump dry, we should send off an alarm and turn that pump off. See, there's lots of things we can do to prevent failure, but we just don't do it. Do we train our operators in how to run the equipment? We got any operators in the room? My number one culprit for causing MRO demands is the operators, because normally they're the ones that kind of mess things up. Just like the rental car, you know what they say about rental cars? No ditch too deep, no curb too high. Yeehaw. So who can impact rental car tires the highest? The maintenance shop in the rental car garage or the driver? Or my teenage kids? Well, I don't have any teenagers anymore, but they used to tear up tires.
Okay. We got 3 minutes. All right.
All good? All hearts pure. You know, I've heard that several times. All hearts pure. So, in fact, my friends, have a good evening. I hear there might be refreshments. Bruce would call it adult refreshments. Yeah, so have a wonderful evening. Be safe, be careful, and God bless you all. Thanks for coming.